Put down that cigarette. Don't you know that smoking kills? You do? Oh. Then why don't you quit? As a longtime smoker, I am fully aware of how harmful smoking cigarettes can be, and yet I still find it difficult to quit. So I asked my doctor to put me on Wellbutrin, otherwise known as bupropion, and it's actually helped a lot. But how exactly does it work? Well, before we can answer that, we first have to understand why cigarettes are so addictive in the first place. Cigarettes are full of tobacco, and tobacco is full of nicotine, and nicotine is very addictive. When you smoke a cigarette and nicotine enters the brain, it affects dopamine pathways. Dopamine is famously known as the pleasure hormone, and nicotine increases dopamine levels in the body by binding to acetylcholine receptors in neurons. When nicotine binds to these receptors, it triggers the release of dopamine into the extracellular fluid. And man, do you feel that dopamine. Within seconds of smoking a cigarette, a wave of relaxation just comes over your whole body like a warm and fuzzy blanket, and it feels fantastic. Unfortunately, when nicotine binds to these receptors, it also desensitizes them, so more and more receptors have to be produced. But when there's more receptors, more nicotine is needed to feel satisfied, and the loop of addiction is established. So now that we know what's going on when we smoke a cigarette, what exactly does bupropion do? Well, one of the main reasons quitting cigarettes can be so difficult is the withdrawal symptoms. Over time, the body gets used to elevated levels of dopamine generated by nicotine. But when you quit smoking, dopamine levels quickly drop off, and in less than an hour, you'll start experiencing things like cravings, irritability, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, restlessness, insomnia, and more. Here's where bupropion comes in. Bupropion blocks the cells from reabsorbing dopamine by binding to transport proteins meant to pick up the dopamine. Because it's not being reabsorbed, dopamine levels rise in the extracellular fluid, alleviating withdrawal symptoms. In addition to this, bupropion also acts as a blockade and doesn't allow nicotine to bind to those acetylcholine receptors. So if you do give in to a craving, the pleasant effects of smoking a cigarette are diminished. Personally, my experience on bupropion has been pretty positive so far. As of recording, it's been 13 days since I've had a cigarette. I think the withdrawal symptoms have been manageable so far. I've definitely experienced difficulty concentrating and insomnia, and I'm definitely still having cravings. I've been working on this project for a while, and I would genuinely like nothing more than to take a break by stepping outside and smoking a cigarette. Weirdly, I couldn't find any information on the thing I'm most curious about bupropion. For me, the most powerful thing about the medication is that it makes cigarettes taste gross. Which, yes, I know if you're not a smoker, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, cigarettes do taste gross, but that's obviously not how I usually feel about them. But I tried smoking a cigarette a few days after being on bupropion, and it was kind of off-putting. I couldn't even finish the cigarette. And even being around others smoking kind of turns my stomach. It's such a dramatic difference in how I usually experience smoking that I'm incredibly curious to know what's going on, but I genuinely couldn't find any information about it. Either way, if you're thinking about quitting, I highly recommend looking into prescription aids, because why not make it as easy as possible for yourself?